And here we are for an afternoon version of Dualistic Unity Social on a Thursday. It's been an interesting day. It's funny because recently we started exploring the, I guess, options for video AI that exist on the internet. And we found a few that will basically go through a long format video and find small portions that would be easily digestible to people who weren't aware of the whole video. And so we've been running a few of our episodes through there, and I always find it kind of funny because for a few reasons. First, I don't always remember. Well, I never remember what it is that we've talked about. Like I always find it funny when somebody brings up like episode one to me, and they're just like, episode one. I was listening to it the other day, and it's great. And I'm like, I have no idea what we talked about. I've never re-listened to episode one since when we first released it. I've never re-listened to any of them outside of the editing process, and I don't even think we did much editing on episode one. That's why we keep talking over one another, right? But I guess the point is that I was running the episode "The Great Awakening" through, and that's season 2, episode 5, for anybody who's wondering. And there was this great clip that came out. I shared it on Instagram, actually. Andrew, you just listened to it. And we were just talking about the simple fact that everybody wants change in the world. We want the world to be more giving, more empathetic, more caring, more balanced. But that balance comes from a state of selflessness. So we expect the government to reflect a state of selflessness that we do not. And it's just because we're always trying to be more. It's not to say being selfish is an evil. Oh my God, you're being selfish. As we've talked about, being selfish taken far enough actually becomes taking care of everyone. And if you're wondering about that, go and check out The Great Awakening. But when we think about being selfish, people tend to think that's a negative intonation, but it's actually just a matter of fact. It's kind of like being self-absorbed. It's not a negative thing. It's a matter of fact. If you are thinking about yourself all the time, you are absorbed in yourself. You're self-absorbed, right? And so to say that you're selfish isn't necessarily to say anything negative, is to recognize that you have a habit of putting yourself first. And how can you not have that habit when you don't feel like you're enough? When you're afraid, of course you have that habit, right? We all have that habit. And so it's in recognizing that habit that drives us, that ultimately drives the machine, drives society, drives our collective direction. And in doing the opposite of not needing to be more, of recognizing that you're enough, just as you are. And that has an entirely different ripple. And just as this got here through the collective ripple of selfishness, selflessness has an entirely different ripple that will create a different kind of society, a different kind of way of life. And at that point, then we can expect whatever system we create to reflect selflessness, because we are, in fact, embodying that mentality that it will be able to reflect. But to expect this system to not have corrupt politicians while each of us are willing to step on others to get ahead, or willing to ignore what consequences there are when we do put ourselves first, like it's an impossible expectation, I guess is what I'm saying. And it was refreshing to see that clip again. It really does remind me what we're doing here, why this conversation is so much fun, and why it's in the application through each person that it really has an impact. It's through you, the listener, you, the viewer, right now, just not putting your worries about yourself at the forefront of your existence, so that way you're not always trying to chase something that you're not, and you're deepening your sense of who you are and your sense of relaxation, sense of empathy, and so people can talk to you more easily and growth can happen. That's it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, well said. Because that selfishness is just, even just thinking about yourself all the time causes you to see everything through that veil of yourself. And it's like we have such an aversion to being called selfish because we just refuse to see that we certainly have the capability to, and oftentimes are. And when we recognize that we can be selfish and look at that, then we're forced to see what it's pointing out to us, see what we're doing. But because there's such an aversion to being called selfish or even thinking about yourself as selfish because we run from that discomfort. We just blind ourselves to all the selfish things that we're doing because of that aversion. We're just not willing to look at it. And those things that we're doing are the things that we don't even realize necessarily that we're doing until we're willing to look at it. There's like this natural sort of aversion to that because it is such a common component of the way we're living and the things we're doing. But yeah, when you stop being so selfish, which is just not thinking about yourself in everything that you do, things start to play out differently. And yeah, so anyway, that's what I got.
Yeah, that's really what it is, and that's as simplistic as it is. And so, yeah, it's always just kind of funny to me when I go back and I catch a clip of an old episode or somebody's talking about something that we said previously, and yeah, it's just it's kind of like when I look back at that video I made back in 2005. Like, while I recognize the tone in terms of it being different than the tone is now, I also recognize the consistency. Like, I also recognize the fact that I'm still saying the same shit. I'm just doing it from a different state than I was previously, and I find that really funny now that you're doing the same. You're going back, you're looking at old clips, and you're going like, right, the words haven't changed, right? The words are very much the same because the insight is very simple. I mean, we're not saying anything that's groundbreaking, but something that on some level everybody knows resonates. Be yourself, relax, be present, however you want to put it. We know something about the state that we're indicating there is a positive in our life when we felt it, or when we felt its absence, not being able to relax, not being able to be ourselves, right? So we know there's something important about that, but we've never thought about it in terms of being something that we can actually prioritize. That in that there is a deepening appreciation of everything else. There is a deepening appreciation of existence as a whole, because you are deepening your appreciation of your own existence. Right. So it's really interesting. I wanted to give a shout out to everybody who's joined us on the live streams. Hi, thank you so much for being here. This is kind of an unexpected episode / live stream. We just appreciate the support. If you have any questions, do feel free to leave them in the comment section. I realize somebody just gave Andrew a giant shout out from Minnesota. There you go. You can do that. You can also ask anything that you'd like regarding the podcast or not. Otherwise, we're going to sit here extremely baked and talk about anything that happens to go through our mind.
Thank, thank you for getting that out there. It's so funny. Like, where does that like that aversion to being able to act how you act when you're high come from? And like the concern for someone finding out that you're high, the whole, and then there's a pull for me always to be like, oh, I'm super baked, kind of as an excuse of the way that I'm acting. Is it because I have a still very much a idea of the right way to act and this isn't matching it, and I don't have so much control as I normally do over pulling it towards a certain direction of what I think is the right way?
I want to say yes.
Oh, so it's really just because when you're high, if you take things seriously, then when you're high, you're not taking things as seriously, and that's not matching your way of seeing yourself. And so it's almost forcing you into seeing yourself differently and letting go of things that you hold on to as still meaning something. Like, you're holding on to certain things thinking they mean something, which means that, you get concerned when certain things come up indicating that it would happen. So they almost show you those things and they're like, sink or swim, bitch. Like, you're feeling this right now. You're going through this. Are you going to let go that it means anything? Let go of the fact that it means anything, this insecurity, this fear, this worry that you have? Or are you going to let go of your idea that it means anything? Or are you going to think that it does? Because we're going to keep showing you consequences if you think that it does mean something. And so it's like showing you the shit. Like, the concerns that come up are the shit that it's still impacting or restricting us from being ourself, because that self doesn't fit the idea of what it is. And that's just it. It's not that it's better or worse. It's just that it doesn't match. It's a different puzzle piece momentarily than the one I've continued to put back into the fucking puzzle.
Because you're more relaxed, right? You see, that's the funny part, right? Like, all the stuff that we feel in a conversation with people is stuff that we feel the rest of the time, but that we've managed to kind of dull by focusing on an end result in the conversation, right? But when you're high, it's very rare that you're going into that conversation for an end result, because everything that happens in the conversation catches your attention. So you're just kind of just drifting along from moment to moment to moment. And so you start to panic because all of a sudden you're feeling insecure. You're like, am I saying the right thing? Do they notice I'm not, crisp, as it were? And what you're really asking is, have they noticed that I've changed? And is there something wrong with where I am? Right. And that's all it is. And you don't have to think about any of that. You can just continue on through the conversation. You really can. And that's kind of the funniest part. And with cannabis, especially, and that's just like talking about psychedelics is a different thing. I don't consider that being high necessarily. That's a different experience. Cannabis, though, because I don't know, we have this tendency of thinking like, oh, it's so different. We tend to make it something to panic about. And it's just because we think to ourselves, oh, this feels different, therefore I must be different. Right. But that's not the case. Like when you're sick, you're not a different person. Right. Like you're just in a different conscious environment. You're just dealing with things in a different way. Oddly enough, the same way that you would deal with them if you were extremely relaxed. Right. And it's just that's it. That's all it is. We're so panicked about being relaxed, about letting go, because we're so committed to the idea that we need to be in control of our lives. That unless I'm on the ball about everything that could potentially happen, of what everybody could potentially think of me, about what tomorrow could potentially bring, it might all fall apart and go to chaos. And to be able to go like, no, you can just relax, let go. You're still going to do your best because you are, but everybody immediately, in it as kind of a defense to the controlling mentality, goes, well, if I relax enough, if I relax too much, I'm not going to do anything. Like all of a sudden, we're just going to lie down until we die just because we've relaxed. You see what I'm saying? And it's just because there's that defense of this mentality, because it's addictive. It's addictive to think about life. It's addictive to think about how you're doing. It's addictive to think about how people think you're doing. But it'll never get you to a state where you're at peace, because it can't. All it can teach you to do is continue down that comparison path, and it becomes a habit. And then it becomes something that's all you do all day long until you forget that you can stop.
Yeah, and it narrows your focus in the sense like cannabis, and how much you have on either side thinking that you need to focus on more expanded areas, whether it's through concern or through desire. You're not gonna have that like same almost like ability to do so when you're as you do when you're sober. And so it's like you're forced into just being where you're at, and it's either keep running to all of the things outside of here and now, or relax and pay attention. But if you're going to keep running, you're going to keep missing it. You're going to keep missing it because you're grasping for the things that you typically are able to, in a sense, or at least think that you're able to convince yourself that you're able to, because you don't have those things. It's like the tools that and fuck, it just hit me that we're Jimmy and Carl on here. I totally forgot that. I was like, oh, that's funny. And I was like, fuck, totally lost where I was going. But and I just had to say that because I knew where I was going. And then I was like, no, but I want to talk about that. And that's and there we are. And that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my God. Yeah, no, completely lost my train of thought as well. And that's the whole thing, right? Like, who are we trying to keep a train of thought for? Where the fuck is it going? And why is it so goddamn important? That's really it. If I don't know exactly what I'm saying, people are going to judge me. People judge you if you know what you're saying. Like, it doesn't matter. That's the whole thing. Somebody's going to judge you for fucking something, right? Like, you can't live your life according to that. And if you're always trying to live within this tiny box of what you think should be, then you're never going to explore what you're capable of. And none of us benefit from that. That's the worst part, is that we play it safe. But the world stagnates as a result. Right? It's through expression, it's through pushing the boundaries of what we think we can do, or what we think we can express, that we do. Right? But if we're trying to be something, and worse, we're trying to be something that we think is the right thing because people will like it and has value according to their comparison, according to their perspectives, we get into a very tight box. Right? And so it's not about that. Just have a train of thought. If that train careens off a cliff, there's more trains. You know, like, that's the whole thing. You've got an infinite amount of trains. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have that much value. The point is getting better at using the trains. For what? To learn. To learn about the process of being processed. Because that's what we are. We never get to an end point where now I understand everything. We never do. And if we ever try to get to that point, if we're always trying to get to that point, we are in this endless loop of frustration and expectation, self-judgment, and concern. And it becomes terrible, 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 until we realize, right. It's right now I have to pay attention to. It's right now where I'm growing. It's right now where I'm learning. This is the rudder of the ship. I'll just drop that there and leave it to you awkwardly.
No, perfect segue. But it's that, like, that moment to moment judgment too. Like, the idea of there being a right or a wrong thing, not even just in the way that you live your life, but in your moment to moment experience. Like, this thing coming up, oh, this interaction, oh, is it going to go, the right way or the wrong way? Like, when you said people judge you for knowing what you're saying, you're afraid of not knowing what you're saying. People do it on both fucking sides. So it's really which side you fall on that you're afraid of, that you're concerned about. But even common sorts of fears, like, it's still this aversion to the recognition that you don't know in this moment whether something's good or bad, positive or negative, how you're going to be perceived. Like, the only thing you know is how you perceive yourself, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And that's all that you know. And everything, every fucking assumption that you make about, what someone else is thinking comes from you. Like, the things that stick are the things that we're already thinking about. And so it's like, that's what we hear. We just hear our own thoughts reflected back to us all day, all the time, because we don't hear it in the same way if it's not something that we think about. So it's like, that's what we're picking up, and we see it physically in the reticular activation system with cars. You think about something, and all of a sudden that's what is being reflected back to you, because it's inside. You're the one maintaining it. It's like, so you literally do see the world that's inside your mind at all times. It's always just reflecting your own stuff back to you, and so how you perceive it, certainly, but then, eventually, not just how you perceive it, like how it is. And that's reality starting to shift.
Exactly. See, this is it, right? Like, we spend so much time, and this is why it kind of gets me when we throw around the word psychosis, right? But when we're talking about psychosis, we're always talking about the extreme end of psychosis. Like, people tend to forget that because, and again, I'm getting a bunch of flack for my disorders and tendencies video on TikTok. Like, there's been some very upset people, but the fact is that a psychological disorder is a category of behaviors, and those behaviors are tendencies that have formed into habitual, almost reflexive actions over time, or thoughts over time. Well, this is true for psychosis as well. Psychosis is a spectrum. It's not just a da 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 da, bam, you have psychosis. That's not how that works. Psychosis is a spectrum. You have extreme states of psychosis and subtle states of psychosis. And so it's important to look at what the fuck is psychosis. What is psychosis at its root? And it's an inability to differentiate between what you're thinking is truth and what is truth. Is that not exactly what our cultural problem is? Where our entire problem with concept and self-image, that we are so caught up in what we're thinking is the truth, that it must be validated, that it must be respected, it must be recognized, it must be defended at all costs, it must be thought about all the time. So we're all existing within this very low-level state of psychosis, whether we recognize it or not. And the opposite, or the alternative to that, is presence, which means a cessation of relying on thought as any degree of truth. Right? It's a fragment, it's a perspective, it's not the whole thing. That means your thoughts about yourself. It means every time you think that somebody is judging you for something, you're just taking that as truth. That's why it bothers you. That is a type of psychosis, and whether you recognize it or not. And so the alternative is to recognize you don't know and to question your thoughts as truth. And how much of your emotional turmoil is just based out of that?
Oh my goodness. Always that. Like, we're always making some degree of an assumption about things and taking that as truth. Like, the tiniest little twangs of, certain things coming up is just because momentarily you took that to be the all and everything truth, no questions asked, as you go through things. Like, any perception that we believe holds any absolute merit is on the spectrum of psychosis, and we don't want to admit that. And we'll even say, well, I don't necessarily definitely believe that. It's like, why are you getting so fucking angry about it then? Like, why are you so mad about it? Like, you are
Addict
to
talk.
yeah, seriously. And yeah, we don't want to admit that we're making massive assumptions and acting accordingly. And there's even a defense for thinking now, like through taking thoughts to be the truth. And I was like, I lost my train of thought. Like, I think 15 seconds ago, and I was just like, just keep saying stuff, and it's gonna come back. And then
Playing with the
finally
fragments, playing with the
yeah,
fragments for
I could
sure.
see it like the frayed end of a rope, just like going off into the mist. I was like, all right, it's time. It's
Yeah,
time to
it's time to let it go. It's not coming back. It served its usefulness. Somebody here in the comment section was saying, I have done my Discover Transcendence homework. Homework is kind of like tongue in cheek there. And now I'm seeing more that it all comes back to identity. So, for anybody who is wondering about what that means, Discover Transcendence was a video that I made, I don't know, like 5 years ago now. It's been a while. It's 48 minutes long. It's got 3 essential life hacks for accelerated personal growth, which is all very markety at the end of the day. Basically, it just breaks down what your brain does, that if you're not aware that it's doing it, it gets in your way and can cause all kinds of merry hell in your life. And that's really all it is that your brain operates in a few very specific ways in order to preserve itself and defend you, but it does not understand that doing so in those ways is actually detrimental to your health and your life as a whole. So there are 3 things that your brain does. And so if you like this kind of content, if you're looking at a simple way to apply some fairly large changes in your life over the short term, check out Discover Transcendence, because I'm really happy about this. But it does move along really fast. So don't try to take it all in one go. Like, I recommend that you break it down by parts. It was originally supposed to be a 5-part series over 5 weeks, but it's all one video now. So just break it down. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, or just come onto the podcast. We explore this stuff all the time.
Yeah, I love that video. I think I've watched it probably 5 or 6 times, because it's very, very dense, but it's like all encompassing of habits, like the things that we do. And it's so interesting how we have this machine that no one points out the potential harm, the potential risk that can be done. It's just like I think you use in Discover Transcendence the example of a chainsaw. Like it's a tool, and if you're using it to cut your sandwich, you're probably gonna fuck some shit up if you're not using it or recognizing the mechanism of it and what its desire to do. Like we don't recognize that it's desiring to find certainty at all times. And so we just let it do it sometimes, but it doesn't actually exist. And then because we don't realize that that's just what it's always trying to do, like just constantly like certainty, stick, 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 stick. It's when you recognize that it's always just trying to do that, you take it so much less seriously. And then it kind of drums out in a sense because there's a recognition that anything that it thinks is sticking or that you think sticks isn't, but that's a practice in itself too, kind of, but it's only ever now. So even I don't know, it's funny even saying like a practice because immediately for me it's like a timeline, like practice and then you know game or performance or whatever, and but it's not. And so it's just because it's just your moment to moment response to everything. And that you could argue as a practice, but it has a different tone than when I'm looking at it on a timeline.
Yeah, practice, refinement. I guess that's the thing. Like, I think the problem with the word practice is that we typically think of it in terms of like practice to get to a performance, as opposed to practice for enthusiasm's sake. That's not really practice. Like, you're not preparing, I guess is what you're saying. It's more of a practice for its own sake.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's kind of the shift for everything. Like when everything becomes a perpetual practice, like there's not much on the line at a practice. You're just practicing. You're doing the things in order to get to the, quote unquote performance where everything matters. But your whole life is just practice, and practice can very much be play when you realize there isn't ever, the point of judgment, the point in which, careful, you're going to get looked at. Your fucking life's going to get looked at. And if you didn't do certain things correctly, then you're going to suffer because of it. Like, oh my God, we almost think there's someone watching our life, judging us as we go. Yeah. Like, holy fuck. We think it's this other thing. We think there's a God in heaven almighty looking down, a devil, manipulating us. And it's just us watching ourselves, us being that fucking greater as we go. It's like a fucking, I don't know. I don't even know. Is greater? Maybe I'm thinking of like a courtroom sketch artist or something, just sitting there, but pretend they're grading you for how you're acting. And they're just sitting there scribbling things down like every single moment. But that's just fucking you. That's just your fucking idea of yourself. Ay, ay, ay. And we think so we make up all these fucking characters. It's like, what's the multi-personality disorder in a sense? But that's kind of just reality experiencing itself. Like every one is a different personality of me, thinking that it's all of, not recognizing that it's all of them and therefore none specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our recent listeners, somebody who just recently started listening to podcasts, I think within like the last 3 months, he was on a roundtable or a call-in show recently. Um, they were they made a video on TikTok saying, it's recently come, I'm starting to understand that the non-dual thing is that we're all part of one source consciousness. And it's like, yeah, sort of. I mean, we're all part of you. Like we're all reflections of you. And so it's like, well, which one's the original? We all are. and everything's a variation of that, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like it always comes back to that point of subjectivity being the all of everything, and then everything that you observe is all you. And this is what baffles us, because it's like, hold up, what about other people? It's like, well, from their point of view, it's the same thing, right? And that's the paradox. So, and what's even more fun is that not only are people reflections of different mentalities, they're reflections of infinite mentalities from moment to moment to moment to moment. So each of their lifetime is also an infinite variation of a lifetime that could exist in terms of perceptions alone. You could have the exact same life physically with totally different perceptions of what's happening. And that would be a different experience of that life, regardless if anything else changed.
So if you're willing, like your life's always changing. You're always experiencing a new variation of you, or have the potential to, moment to moment to moment, unless you're maintaining this very strict, stringent idea. And
Which is why it's okay to daydream. It's why it's okay to get lost in thoughts and then go, oh wait a minute, I get lost in that, right? Because all of a sudden you're always accessing all of the infinite perceptions of right now that you could be accessing, but you're accessing them according to relevance, in my opinion, right? Like that's why all of a sudden when something triggers you, you'll have a memory of where that trigger came from. All of a sudden you're exploring a perception that's relevant to the perception that you're in. So it's not that those infinite perceptions aren't always there, but there's an element to our own intelligence that's actually, keeping the ones that are relevant within our purview, and the ones that are not just kind of get forgotten or blocked out. Which is why psychedelics are so very interesting, because in that state of relaxation, you're just aware of more and more and more and more of them, right? Your intelligence is more or less restricted, right? And so all of a sudden you're aware of all these perceptions, and as a result of that, you're having a different experience of yourself. Things start to make sense that didn't previously.
so when you get, quote unquote, triggered, or have a trauma response or something, or even just a memory of something that was, more deeply rooted, that ties into a certain feeling, like, you think one causes the other, but you're saying it's just like another opportunity to feel that feeling, that same one from that memory, or at least one that you're feeling like is the same, and then be a little bit less concerned about it, like have that shift, and so therefore it's just all me going through shit, and then re-experiencing it and being willing to let it go,
That's it.
kind of.
And until you let it go, because that's the only reason it popped up to begin with, is because you're still identifying with that, right? So you're being, given an opportunity to look at that, find another insight from it, change your perspective of it, stop necessarily holding on to it as something that you must deal with over time. That's the healing process, right? And then that memory doesn't come up anymore because it doesn't need to.
The healing process being letting go of the idea that there was ever anything wrong with you throughout any of those things. It's not about re-experiencing it and re-responding. It's recognizing that no, there was nothing ever wrong with you at any point, no matter what you went through. It's like you can still maintain that assumption. And it's until you realize that it's like your whole life fully letting go, forgiving yourself, even for having a perspective of yourself that you did think of yourself in another spot as less than, like, even forgiving that and that judgment. Damn.
And that happens when you make the most of it now, right? Like you're able to forgive yourself for all of that when you're able to look at those memories and learn something from it, right? And that's the whole thing. You make something of it, and all of a sudden it's not something that happened to you. It's something that you're making work for you. It's very different. All of a sudden you can let it go because you've learned from it, because you've learned, that it didn't define you, because you've learned about all of the factors that may have contributed to it, and that's taught you empathy for those involved. Like there's so much involved, but the whole point is that there's an opportunity there for you to learn how to let it go. And that's just removing your need to hold on to it.
Yeah, because holding on to it is just holding on to the story. Like, it's a component of the story of your, solid idea that you are what you think you are. And those things, even being something that you identify with, is gonna keep you from that. Like, I'm even thinking now when someone talks about or brings up a TikTok that I made like 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago. I'm like, oh, I sound so, you know, stiff and all that. Like, that my aversion there is only because I see myself as that. And there's that, you know, deeper connection to that, as where it's being seen as truth. Like, that is what I am. That's all that I am. And so any aversion that I feel is just fucking showing my attachment to that as I'm going. And so, yeah, because I have so like I hate when someone shows me that, but oh shit. Hmm.
See, I always look at it as a chance to remember empathy, right? Where I came from, and to recognize, like, wow, there were so many things I didn't know. Like, and that was really it. Like, how can you judge yourself for not knowing things, like that not even knowing what you should know, right? Or you feel you should know. That's why it's kind of pointless to look back and judge yourself as much as you might want to, but we always want to, based on the understanding that we've achieved through going through that. Isn't that funny? It's like I've come to this understanding that I couldn't have come to unless I fucked up that. But now that I've come to understand this, I shouldn't have fucked up that. It's like you couldn't have got here otherwise. And so we kind of we miss the whole point, but it's only because we want to judge ourselves, and that again is optional. Right? It really is optional to judge yourself or not. That doesn't mean you're not learning. It doesn't mean that it somehow absolves you from consequence. This is the thing. It's like, well, if I don't judge myself, what's to stop me from being an asshole? I don't know. All the people that fucking get pissed at you. Like, the fact that your life is going to turn to shit, you're going to have no relationships and nobody's going to respect you and you're going to be surrounded by other assholes. You don't think that maybe that might fucking encourage you to do some changes in your life? Like, it's so interesting to me that it's like, and if I don't think something's wrong, why would I change? Consequence? It's the reason you fucking change ever. Like, it's the most interesting thing that we actually get so lost in thinking our way into destination that we think that life wouldn't happen unless we did. You don't have to be thinking, ow, that hurts, to be moving away from something that's hurting you.
Exactly. Like, the thought that I like, if I stopped thinking that things would stop happening is ridiculous, but I almost, like, don't even trust it that I never even give it a shot. It's like, you could stop. You could stop doing that thing that you're doing all the time and experiencing so many consequences and shooting yourself in the foot and punching yourself in the face every single day doing. You spent a lot of time considering everything, measuring everything, thinking a very specific way about yourself that's just a limited fucking assumption. It's like, you ever want to try maybe not doing that for a little bit? You ever want to try maybe just one little other thing than the thing that you've continued to do day after day, moment after moment after moment after moment, wondering how you're doing, judging yourself, constantly afraid of what someone's gonna think or how it's gonna seem to someone else, but it's really just how it's gonna seem to you because you're the only one that judges yourself ever. Yours is the only one that ever sticks. So I, you could keep doing that. You could keep being afraid of that, or you could fucking relax and prioritize just where you're at, the moment that you are, right now as opposed to any spot that you're getting to or anything you're becoming. Like you could just relax and pay attention and just chill the fuck out. And if someone wants to see you in a certain way, they're going to do it no matter what you do. They're going to do it anyway, no matter what. No matter how you fucking sound or say something or no matter what the fuck you do, they're always going to and they're just seeing their own shit. They're just seeing their own stuff and their judgment is just from that. And so it's kind of irrelevant what you do in any way, shape, or form. So you might as well just fucking relax and keep stepping.
The tragic part is that we know this, but we always kind of isolate it to a particular part of our life. Let's say, so anything that we have a passion about, whether it's a particular sport or I don't know, knitting, maybe you like going down to the beach and looking for rocks, whatever your passion might be, that passion came about through you just doing it and doing it so much that when you go and do it, you put all of your attention into it. And then you come out of doing that thing. Maybe you like, I don't know, shooting basketball, right? So you go and you just do some free throws. Well, while you're doing that, you're not thinking about your life. Why aren't you thinking about your life? Well, because you're focused on the basketball. You're focused on the free throws. Well, how did you get to that point? By focusing on the free throws for enough time that it actually felt really good to do, right? Because you didn't think about whether or not it was something you should do. And so now you actually put your thoughts aside. It's not that they stop being there, it's that you stop prioritizing them as the thing that is going to help you get that fucking ball in the fucking basket. Because the more you're thinking about yourself and your day and the person that pissed you off at work, the less likely you're going to get that ball in the basket. And yet we only do it for that one part of our life. Then we go back to our house and we start thinking about ourselves where we're trying to cook. We burn ourselves, we cut our finger, we get in an argument with our wife, we do all kinds of shit. And why? Because we're lost in our thought. We're not putting the same attention into what we're doing moment to moment to moment that we were when we were playing basketball or whatever our passion happens to be. And it's just because we don't recognize that the same mechanism that happens in that passion, the more you think about yourself, the less you're in it, the less you get a benefit from it, the less fulfilling it feels. That lesson applies to fucking everything. Everything. And it's just that, we don't necessarily talk about it that way. And that's why the discussion is so much fun. For anybody who's watching right now, thanks for joining us. If you haven't yet, check out the Dualistic Unity podcast. We talk about this stuff all the time. It's a lot of fun. The conversation gets relatively deep and sometimes kind of silly. And there's a big community that is growing up around this because it's an important conversation to recognize that you're enough. You don't always have to be thinking about whether or not you're doing okay. You can let go, and you're going to be doing just as well, if not better, as you would be if you were doubting it.
And that realization that you can just pay attention to where you're at, like you can just focus on that. And if you are, then your life isn't as much of a thing. Like everything outside of this moment. It almost like as you were talking, I was like so locked in. It was like trippy. It was like a tunnel vision on just you, basically, just focused in on that because there wasn't anything else, because there isn't anything else happening. There isn't actually anything else happening outside of right now. Like there is nothing else. I'm going to say that one more time. There's nothing else happening outside of this. And so what could you possibly grab onto that would do anything better than paying attention, than just being focused on the thing? But I still want to. Like I still want to. Is that like a floaty or training wheels? Like I don't have enough faith in myself to just pay attention to where I'm at, that I keep grasping for something in the future or something in the past to buoy me. in a sense, and with more faith in yourself, it's like you don't need as many things, so you don't grasp for as many things, but no one's grabbing onto anything anyway. They're just becoming more numb to what's actually happening, to the point that, you know, it's like being asleep, like looking at something with, or closing your eyes, like putting on shades, like that. Focus on anything outside of where you're at, because nothing, oh, fuck, nothing else is happening.
No. Well, I mean, this is it. I mean, this is why I like Zen, you know, if not now, when? Because it's always now. Right? Like, when are you going to change? When are you going to change if it's not now? Right? But we're never actually focused on now. We're always focused on the past or the future, which stagnates our change, actually gets in the way of us, you know, just changing. This is why you can get so caught up in your narrative of all the reasons that you can't change that you don't, which is kind of sad in itself, right? But here in this moment is where we have our most vibrant potential, right? We have the most efficacy here in the moment. It's just that, to go back to your question, um, it's not just training wheels. It's not just that you want to hold on to the edge because you're afraid. It's that everybody around you is doing the same thing, and over an entire lifetime, you've been taught that's the thing to do. And so, as we've discussed previously, it's very much like, you know, trying to deliberately piss your pants. You know, like you've spent an entire lifetime trying to avoid pissing your pants. You know, to actually actively try to do it is rather difficult. Right. And I encourage anybody here, if you got a spare pair of pants, go nuts. Maybe we'll start a new trend. The pants
Isn't that,
challenge.
yeah, right? Isn't that interesting too? Because I'm now picturing, like, could I do that? Probably not. Probably not in this chair, but wouldn't want to. But it's like you'd have to relax so much to pee your pants, right? Like that's the shift, is you relaxing something that you're kind of subtly squeezing at all times, and have learned to subtly squeeze so that it doesn't just keep coming out. Like, is what's keeping urine from coming out of you your constant tension on a component of the, somewhere between your bladder and the hole?
One that you had to learn at one point, because that's why you were forced to wear a diaper, because you didn't have the recognition that you had to go and pee somewhere when it was coming. You were just like, "What's that? Oh, that's warm." You know, and it's a totally different thing. It's something we had to learn over time. It's also something we lose over time, or have the potential to
Yeah,
lose.
right? Because if it's just relaxing that changes that, and it's tension that we have, then it's like our aversion to just paying attention to where we're at is coming from our lack of relaxation, like from our tension. Is it feels uncomfortable because we have actively avoided that and built strategies around avoiding this through trying to seem better in the moment, but not ever actually being there. Like utilizing all of these strategies to grab onto some degree of certainty in the future that you don't actually know, to, you know, feel better, or I don't know, be perceived as better right now, as opposed to just being there, because all of those things don't guarantee anything anyway. Like there's no guarantee of anything. Is and yeah, man, even the habitual stuff, like they don't guarantee the things that we think they do. The very, very habitual stuff still doesn't guarantee anything. Like there's still no degree of certainty whatsoever of how something's gonna go. Like,
And there never has been. So, I mean, you may as well just continue on. You know, do your best, have some faith in yourself, because you have no certainty. More importantly, you don't know what's best for you. Like, because you oversimplify everything. We oversimplify everything, which is why everybody's got a general ambition to be rich. Like, somehow that's going to stop you from having all your doubts and fears. Well, if I have enough money, look, I'll prop myself up. Yeah, until you meet somebody with more money. Right? Like, that's the thing. We oversimplify the entire equation of what life is about. And it's just because the alternative is making the most of right now, which is oddly enough where a lot of our success comes from. People will ignore that, but it's true. You can go from the most dire of situations. And I know, again, I've been homeless before. I understand that in dire situations, you can pity yourself to nothingness, or you can try and make the most out of the day that you have. And that doesn't necessarily mean going and getting a job and doing all that stuff. It might mean making some friends in the community that you're a part of. It might mean, making is in doing some outreach to people who might be able to help you get on your feet, or even just spending an afternoon learning a skill. Like that's what I mean about making the most. It's not, like all of a sudden you can just turn things around in a day, but you can certainly do more with what time you have right now. And you can do more, I mean, you can do something other than judge yourself. That's all. And people will be like, well, if I don't judge myself, how am I going to get any momentum? If you do judge yourself, how are you going to maintain that momentum?
Oh man. Right? Because if we're doing it as we're going, why the fuck do we think it's gonna stop? And it's interesting too with attention. I think I've always had this assumption that attention is just kind of a dot as opposed to a spectrum. Like you're either paying attention to something or you're not. And it's not that at all. It is entirely a spectrum. And depending on how much shit you're holding on to conceptually, it's going to take some of that attention away. And so if you're doing something and you say we're able to have 100% attention on that thing, would that not you cut down the timeline like 10x? If it takes someone, the 10,000 hours rule to become a master at something. But what if that's only at 10% attention? Like you have so much other shit, including the desire to get to the thing that you're going through, as opposed to just wholeheartedly giving attention. That what if it could make it 1,000 hours instead? Because there's like a feel or some nature to the attention. I can't think of the word, but there's a variation in the degree and the nature of the attention that you give, right? And so, of course, there's going to be a difference depending on how much other shit you're holding on to, or
That's that
what you.
story of the martial artist you were talking about last week. It's like, how long will it take me to be a master? 10 years. Well, what if I work twice as hard and twice as fast? 20 years. Why? Because you're trying to get somewhere. So your attention is split, right? It's the whole thing about the archer. If you're shooting for the target and the prize, you're not actually fully shooting for the target, right? And therefore, you're less likely to get the prize.
And if the prize is just a fulfilled life, like a life that you're actually paying attention to and living, like it's right there when you stop trying to get to it. Like one you're actually seeing, and it's not to say that oftentimes circumstances are fucked, but you're at least seeing it. Like you're at least seeing this for what it is that isn't what you think that it is.
That's the
And
only way.
then
That's the only way to see it, is to stop thinking you know what it is.
because it's only seen through the cessation of any certainty whatsoever, including an idea of any sort of idea of what it is, because it's just the lack thereof. It's just the lack of ideas that, busts open that wall.
Isn't that interesting? We're so used to giving words to ideas, like expressing ideas through words, that I think we've actually confused the two. I think we've confused ideas with the concepts that we use to describe those ideas, right? Like it's kind of like Einstein. Einstein had a lot of his revelations long before he was able to describe them using math, right? So it's not like it came to him as a mathematical formula. It was a recognition of something that then he had to struggle to put into a mathematical formula, right? And so the same is true with ideas. Like we look at it as like an idea, and here's the words that express that idea. That's not the idea. Those are the words that you express that idea. And sometimes in using the words, you actually limit the idea itself. And so we start to think like, if I'm not talking to myself through stuff, I'm not having ideas, right? But the ideas were never the words. The ideas were the recognitions that were part of you changing. It was the ideas are really just another word for a moment of recognition, a moment of growth, right? That then we turn into words. But yeah, I think it's really funny that we actually start to think the ideas are the words that we use to describe them. And they're not felt that way. They might be translated that way when we listen to ourselves saying the idea, even in our head. But the idea itself was a moment of recognition that then we pack out into words over time. I just thought that was interesting.
Like, how much of a habit is that? Naming things and thinking that it's that. Like, I'm looking at a chair over there. Like, that's not a chair.
And you'd know that if you built it, right? Like if you went and you got the
Mm.
sticks together and you put it together and you're like, you know what, I'm going to put it this way. And then you've never seen a chair before in any way, shape, or form. And you actually were just trying to design something to sit down on, forgot the whole name of chair entirely. You would have a different perspective of what that chair is. It would be a bunch of wood and some fabric and some nails put together. The label takes away from what it is.
Oh, entirely. And even just as you were saying that, in my head, I was getting the imagery of, like, myself being, bones and skin and organs and you start to see that there's like, there's not an idea in that. You put together yourself like you put together a chair, and you see yourself as a mechanism of experience, as opposed to something that has to live up to something. Holy shit. Cause because that's all that you are without so much of an idea, and yet without the idea, everything isn't what you think that it is. And then when everything's not what you think it is, when everything's not what you think it is, then it's everything's everything.
Which
And
means you never get to an end point. You're always deepening your understanding because it's always everything. There's always a deeper understanding to have if you're willing to just be change in motion, which is what we frankly hold ourselves back from because it's intense. So we actually slam on the brakes by thinking about it to some degree.
oh, so much so. Oh my goodness. But yeah. Ah, shit. Mm,
That's all right. We actually have to end this episode of Dualistic Unity Social because you have to go in 5 minutes. And normally we would be recording an episode of Being High at this time, but our guest was not able to attend today. So we're going to be doing that next week potentially. If you haven't checked out our series, Being High, do check out Dualistic Unity Being High. We have 3 episodes and they're all super informative. I really enjoyed chatting with Riley recently. Riley at Cannabis Chem. Check out her channel. She's just fantastic. But thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Andrew, as always, thank you for the conversation, man. I appreciate that we go into these conversations just ripped sometimes, and I did actually encourage you to get pretty high before we got online. So it's an exercise in faith, is how I look at it.
absolutely. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. And just letting go of the shit you judge yourself for too. Like that hit me fucking hard today. Is it's not doing anything. It's just your idea that that wasn't right. That was wrong. It was a wrong thing to do. And it's constantly, so it's like it almost shows you that until you're like, fucking, all right, keep clenching or submit. You gonna submit? All right, I submit. And then you just keep on keeping on. So anyway, yeah, it's been fun.
It has been fun. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be back on Sunday and Monday. If you can join us on Patreon, great. And then next week, we're going to be in Vermont for the, what is it, sixth Dualistic Unity Retreat. That's fucking crazy. Sixth, with the seventh one being in the Netherlands, potentially a seventh one in Vancouver. If anybody's interested in a Vancouver mini retreat, go to dualisticunity.com/Vancouver. Let us know. The tickets aren't available right now because we're not sure if it's going to happen. But if you're interested, let us know and we'll let you know if it's happening. Otherwise, take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.